At 5 a.m., the solo hiker stands beside an ancient redwood trunk, one hand resting on bark older than every ambition he has ever carried. The fog is low, the air is cold enough to make his breath visible, and the danger is not the forest. The danger is realizing how small a human life can feel when nothing in nature is impressed by it. Most people run from that feeling. They reach for noise, for movement, for a screen, for proof that they still matter. But here, in Redwood National Park, the forest does not argue. It simply wakes. Damp earth rises from the ground. A bird shifts somewhere above the fog. Light touches the high branches before it reaches him. What do you do when silence does not comfort you, but measures you? In this lesson, samurai discipline is not escape. It is learning to stand still long enough for attention to become strength.
The solo hiker did not come to Redwood National Park to have his life explained to him. He came early because early hours make a person feel clean. No traffic yet. No voices. No one asking for anything. No messages sliding across a screen with that tiny vibration that can turn a whole morning into someone else's emergency. He parked before sunrise, tightened the straps on his pack, and walked into the fog with the private confidence of someone who believed silence would make him feel larger. Then the forest refused to perform for him. There was no dramatic opening. No golden beam breaking through like a movie. No sudden answer waiting behind the first bend in the trail. Just wet soil under his boots, the damp chill slipping through the sleeves of his jacket, and the huge dark body of an ancient tree trunk rising beside him like a wall that had forgotten humans existed. He stopped there. Not because he was tired. Not because the trail was blocked. He stopped because the redwood made motion feel almost disrespectful. His palm hovered near the bark before he let it touch. The surface was rough, grooved, cold with the night still inside it. He could feel little ridges pressing into the lines of his hand. A human hand, soft compared to that bark. A brief thing. A tool for texting, gripping steering wheels, signing receipts, opening doors, holding coffee cups in airports. A hand that had once seemed important because it was always doing something. Against the trunk, it looked almost temporary. That was the first confrontation. Not danger, not hunger, not bad weather, just scale. A redwood does not need to insult you to humble you. It does not need to speak. It does not need to prove anything. It stands in the fog while generations pass under it with their plans, their arguments, their job titles, their little victories, their private heartbreaks. The hiker can feel that, and something in him tightens. Because there is a kind of silence that heals you. And there is a kind of silence that removes your excuses. He had spent most of the week moving too fast to notice what was underneath him. He had answered emails while standing at the kitchen counter. He had checked the weather 3 times and never once looked at the sky. He had left a message from his sister unopened because he did not want the weight of another human voice at the end of a long day. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make him a villain. Just the small evasions of a person trying to stay in motion so the deeper questions could not catch him. And now, at 5 a.m., they caught him anyway. The forest was waking without hurry.
Somewhere high above, a wing moved through needles. Drops of water fell from fern tips to the ground with a soft, irregular patter. The fog did not lift all at once. It thinned in layers, revealing one trunk, then another, then the dark green rise of moss at the base of a fallen log. The earth smelled soaked and old. Not dirty. Alive. Full of things breaking down and feeding what would outlast them. He noticed his own breath beginning to sound too loud. That is what happens when a person meets a scale larger than the ego can manage. The mind looks for a handle. It wants to turn the experience into a caption, a memory, a lesson, a story it can own. It wants to say, I was here. I saw this. I understood something. It wants to make even humility into an achievement. His hand moved toward his phone. The motion was so small he almost missed it. A thumb brushing the pocket seam. A quick little reach, half instinct, half escape. He told himself he only wanted a picture, and maybe that was partly true. The light was beginning to touch the upper branches. The fog had turned pale gray. It would have made a beautiful shot. But underneath the excuse was something less clean. He wanted proof that he had not disappeared. That is the shadow in this forest. The fear that a human life, with all its noise and effort, may be insignificant beside nature's age and indifference. Not worthless. That is not the same thing. Worthless is a verdict. Insignificant is a scale. And scale can frighten a person because it takes away the flattering mirror. The hiker had spent years measuring himself through movement. Miles driven. Work finished. Messages returned. Plans made. Problems solved. Even rest had become a form of performance. The right trail, the right gear, the right photo, the right quiet morning posted later with the right few words. But the redwood trunk did not care whether he captured it. The forest did not become more real because he documented it. It did not become less real because he stood there empty-handed. That irritated something in him. Not loudly. Not in a way he would admit. But his jaw set for a moment. His shoulders rose. His eyes looked for a task. Stillness can feel like failure to someone trained by noise. That is why Zanshin matters here. Zanshin is not spacing out in a pretty place. It is not floating above your life with a calm expression. In the samurai discipline lens, Zanshin is complete attention after the obvious action has stopped. It is the mind that stays with the moment when there is nothing to win, nothing to fix, nothing to announce. A person with Zanshin does not need the world to become dramatic before he becomes awake. The hiker has no enemy in front of him. No opponent. No emergency. Just a forest waking up, and his own discomfort with being small. So the confrontation moves inward. He notices how quickly the mind tries to defend itself. It compares. It narrates. It reaches for memory. It thinks about the drive back. It wonders whether he should move farther down the trail before other hikers arrive. It imagines what the redwoods looked like before highways, before parking lots, before his whole family line was even a thought in the world. Then it flinches. Too much space. Too much time. Too much proof that the self is not the center. A less disciplined response would turn the discomfort into restlessness. He would take the picture, adjust the angle, check the image, maybe walk on before the silence had time to work on him. He would leave with evidence and miss the encounter. His body would travel through the forest while his attention stayed trapped inside the small room of himself. A disciplined response is quieter and more difficult. He leaves the phone where it is. His hand returns to the ancient tree trunk. Not to own it. Not to make a point. Just to feel what is actually there. The ridges. The damp cold. The way the bark does not soften for his mood. He lets the forest be older than him without turning that into a wound. That is harder than it sounds. Modern life teaches a person to fight insignificance by becoming louder. Build more. Post more. Explain more. Prove that you were here by leaving marks everywhere. But the forest offers another kind of training. It does not ask the hiker to hate his smallness. It asks him to stop panicking inside it. There is a difference. Small can mean disposable when the ego is in command. Small can mean precise when attention returns. A needle of light appears on a fern. The hiker sees it only because he has stopped negotiating with the moment. A line of moisture shines along the bark. Somewhere behind him, a branch settles under its own weight. The forest is not silent, not really. It is full of sounds too small for a hurried mind. He begins to understand the first lesson of this morning. The redwood is not making his life meaningless. It is removing the fake meanings he has been clinging to because they were easier to measure. The inbox. The pace. The image. The little hunger to be seen. Under that, something quieter remains, a breath in cold air, a hand on bark, a human being allowed to be brief and still responsible for the quality of his attention. The confrontation does not end with a revelation. It rarely does. He is still small. The tree is still immense. The fog still moves without asking what he thinks of it. But he has not run from the feeling. He has not filled it with noise. For one clean minute before sunrise, he lets the forest wake up without demanding that it explain him. And in that minute, the ancient tree trunk stops being a monument to his insignificance. It becomes a test of whether he can remain fully present in a world that was never built around him. Training begins before the forest gives him peace. It begins while his fingers are still cold against the ancient tree trunk, while his mind is still looking for a way to make this moment useful. He keeps his hand on the bark. That is the first act. No dramatic breath. No perfect posture. No sudden calm arriving like a gift. Just his palm staying where it is when the old habit wants to reach for the phone again. The bark is rough enough to hold his attention. It does not flatter him. It does not comfort him in the soft way people usually mean that word. It gives him texture. Ridges. Dampness. A dark groove under the heel of his hand where last night's fog has settled. He lets that be enough. The mind wants to turn the forest into an idea. The body brings him back to contact. He lowers his shoulders half an inch. At first, he does not even realize they were raised. The chill made him tighten. The scale of the trees made him brace. The thought of being small made his chest harden as if he had to defend himself from something that was never attacking him. So he lets the shoulders drop. Slowly. Without making a performance out of relaxation. The movement is small, but it changes the room inside his ribs. The forest is still immense. He is still brief. But now he is not standing against that fact like a man waiting for bad news. A drop falls from a high branch and lands on a fern near his boot. He turns his head toward it. Not fast. Just enough to let the sound complete itself. Another drop hits the ground farther away. Then another. The pattern is uneven, almost private. He had mistaken the forest for silence because he was listening with a hurried mind. Now the morning begins to separate into details. His next act is to stop naming the feeling too quickly. The word insignificant rises in him, and he notices how heavy it feels. The mind likes big words when it wants to escape the actual moment. Big words can become tunnels. You enter one, and suddenly you are no longer touching bark at 5 a.m. You are arguing with your whole life. Your childhood. Your future. Your work. Your body. Your place in the world. He does not follow it. He looks at the trunk and gives himself a smaller sentence. I am standing here. That is all. The sentence has no drama in it. It does not solve the fear. It does not make him important. It simply keeps him from being swallowed by a thought too large to handle before sunrise. He moves his attention down to his boots. The soles are pressed into wet soil. One boot has sunk slightly near a root. He shifts his weight until both feet are planted. The adjustment is barely visible, but inside him it matters. A person who feels insignificant often starts floating away from his own body. He becomes a mind hovering above the scene, measuring, judging, comparing, narrating. The feet end that drift. The ground says, here. He inhales through the nose and lets the damp scent of earth enter without turning it into poetry. Old leaves. Wet bark. Soil opening under the cold. A faint green smell from the ferns. He holds none of it. He just receives it. Then he exhales slowly enough to see the breath fade into the fog. One breath. Then another. Not to become calm on command. That would be another way to control the morning. He breathes to stop abandoning the place where his life is actually happening. The ancient tree trunk stays under his hand. It is beginning to change meaning. At first, it was a measurement. The tree was vast, and he was small. The bark felt like evidence against him. Now the trunk becomes a boundary. His palm on it tells him, do not leave the present just because it does not make you the center. Stay here long enough to notice what is real. A bird calls once from somewhere above the fog. He does not look for it immediately. He listens to the space after the sound. That space is part of the training. Most people only hear the obvious thing. The alert. The voice. The demand. The praise. The insult. The headline. The result. Zanshin listens after the sound, when the mind normally rushes ahead. He lets the call disappear. Then he watches the forest continue without him. This is where the deeper practice begins. He allows nature to be indifferent without turning indifference into rejection. The forest is not cold toward him. It is not warm toward him either. It is simply complete in a way that does not require his approval. That fact used to feel like a threat. Now, for a few seconds, it feels clean. The redwoods do not need him to be impressive. The fog does not need him to produce an identity. The moss does not ask what he has achieved. His jaw loosens. He notices the urge to explain his life to no one. It comes as a pressure behind the ribs, almost like preparing for a conversation that will never happen. He wants to justify the unfinished work, the unanswered message from his sister, the years spent being busy without always being present. The forest gives him no courtroom. No jury. No defense. So he chooses one small repair inside the moment. He pulls the phone from his pocket, not to take a picture, but to turn it completely off. The screen lights up against the gray morning. For a second, the brightness looks cheap out here, too sharp, too eager. His thumb pauses over the power button. A part of him resists. What if there is something important? What if someone needs him? What if this quiet becomes too quiet? He powers it down anyway. Then he puts it back. The action does not make him pure. It does not make technology bad. It simply closes one door of escape for the next few minutes. Training often looks like that. Not a vow shouted into the sky. Just removing the nearest exit so attention has a chance to stay. He returns his hand to the trunk. Same bark. Different man touching it. Now he lets his eyes move slowly from the base of the tree upward. He does not try to see the top. The fog hides it, and he accepts that. He studies only what is given, the wide base, the dark vertical grooves, the moss collected in small shelves, the pale thread of a spiderweb trembling between two ridges. He shrinks the battle. He does not need to understand mortality. He does not need to settle the value of a human life before breakfast. He does not need a grand conclusion worthy of a notebook. He only needs to complete the next act of attention. See the bark. Feel the ground. Hear the drops. Let the breath leave. Do not run. The forest responds by doing nothing special. That is part of its instruction. No applause comes from the branches. No sign appears. No inner voice gives him a clean sentence to carry home. The ritual is quiet enough to be missed by anyone walking past. He bends slightly and picks up a fallen redwood needle from the damp ground. It rests across his fingers, thin and simple. He holds it beside the massive trunk and sees the lesson without forcing it. The forest is made of scale and detail at the same time. Immense trees. Tiny needles. Centuries of growth. One drop of water sliding along one edge. His life does not have to become huge to become worthy of attention. It has to become attended. The shadow in him does not disappear. It still whispers that he is temporary. That the tree will remain after his name is forgotten. That the morning would unfold exactly the same if he had stayed in bed. He does not argue with it. Argument would make the shadow larger. Instead, he places the fallen needle back where he found it and stands still. A practiced person does not defeat every thought. He chooses which thought receives his hands. So he gives his hands to the bark, the soil, the cold strap of the pack against his shoulder. He gives his eyes to the fog thinning between trunks. He gives his breath to the air that does not belong to him and never did. Minute by minute, the ritual becomes less strange. Hand on trunk. Feet in earth. Phone off. Breath visible. Eyes slow. One real thing at a time. The forest has not made him bigger. It has made his attention cleaner. And for the first time that morning, being small does not feel like humiliation. It feels like permission to be exact. The first light does not arrive like an answer. It arrives in pieces. A pale line touches the fog between two trunks. Then a higher branch catches a dull silver edge. Then the ground, still dark and soaked, begins to show its own quiet detail. Fern tips curled with moisture, a thin root crossing the trail, the print of his boot slowly filling with water. The solo hiker is still beside the ancient tree trunk. Nothing about the forest has become smaller. Nothing has leaned down to reassure him. The redwood still rises beyond the fog, beyond the reach of his eyes, beyond the little arithmetic his mind uses to measure importance. He is still one man at 5 a.m. in a national park older than his worries. His breath still comes out white in the damp chill. But something in the way he stands has changed. Earlier, the trunk felt like a verdict. It made his body tighten. It made his hand reach for proof. It made the silence feel like a room where he had been forgotten. Now his palm rests on the bark without asking the tree to say anything back. The bark is not soft. It has not become friendly. It is still rough, cold, grooved with age and weather. But he no longer feels accused by it. He feels held in place by contact. The trunk is not telling him he does not matter. It is teaching him that mattering was never the same as being large. That distinction lands slowly. A person can spend half a life confusing visibility with value. If enough people see you, you must be real. If enough tasks need you, you must be important. If your phone keeps lighting up, if your calendar stays full, if your name appears in enough rooms, then maybe the old fear will stay quiet. But out here, the forest gives no such bargain. The redwood has no interest in his resume. The fog does not care whether he is admired. The damp earth receives his boot the same way it receives a fallen needle, a broken branch, the print of a deer moving before sunrise. At first, that felt like erasure. Now it feels like relief. He lets his hand slide down the bark an inch, just enough to feel a deeper groove under his fingers. He notices how the ridge holds rainwater in a thin black line. He notices a small ant moving across the trunk, disappearing into a crack, returning with no concern for the giant scale around it. The ant does not pause to solve the meaning of existence. It carries what is in front of it. The hiker almost smiles, but not in a way that breaks the morning. He thinks of the unopened message from his sister. The thought still carries weight. It does not vanish because he has breathed beside a tree. The forest does not turn him into a better man by magic. There will still be the drive home. There will still be bills, traffic, missed chances, and the ordinary friction of being human among other humans. He will still forget. He will still reach for noise some mornings before he even knows he is lonely. The shadow remains. Human life is brief. Nature is vast. The redwood will outlast his mood, his name, maybe every small crisis he thought would define him. But now the thought does not shove him out of his body. He can stand near it. That is the transformation. Not victory over smallness. accuracy inside it. He lifts his hand from the trunk and, for a moment, sees the mark it leaves behind, a faint patch of warmth fading from the bark. Then the chill begins to take it back. No monument. No lasting sign. Just contact, then release. Something about that feels honest. He steps back from the tree, not to leave, but to see it differently. The base is wide enough to make him feel almost childlike. Ferns crowd the roots. Fog moves around the trunk in slow sheets. Somewhere above, a bird calls again, and this time he does not chase the sound with his eyes. He lets it enter. He lets it leave. His phone remains off in his pocket. The pocket feels heavier now, but not with temptation. More like a closed door he does not need to open yet. The world will return. People will ask things of him. Screens will glow. A voice in his head will eventually say, check. Capture. Respond. Proof. But for now, his attention has a spine. He turns toward the trail. A few minutes ago, movement felt like escape. Now it feels like participation. His first step is careful, not because he is afraid, but because the ground deserves accuracy. Wet soil shifts under his boot. A root presses through the tread. His shoulders are lower. His pace is slower than before. He does not hike to conquer the trail. He walks as if he has been admitted into something he cannot own. The forest continues to wake around him. Light gathers in the high branches. The fog thins enough to reveal columns of redwood in every direction, each one standing with the same patience that had unsettled him at first. The air remains cold. The scent of damp earth stays close to the ground. Every few steps, he hears water fall from leaf to leaf before it reaches the soil. He notices more because he needs less from the scene. That is what presence does. It stops demanding that every moment explain your importance. It lets a fern be a fern. It lets the morning be gray. It lets the body be cold without turning discomfort into a personal insult. He pauses once more beside the ancient tree trunk before the trail bends away. This time, he does not put his full palm against it. He touches it with 2 fingers. Lightly. Almost like acknowledging a teacher he will never fully understand. The gesture is small enough that no one else would notice it. But inside him, it has weight. Earlier, the trunk showed him his insignificance. Now it shows him his place. A place does not have to be grand to be real. A human life does not need to tower over the world to be lived with care. He can answer the message when he gets back to the car. He can return one call without performing concern. He can give one meal, one conversation, 1 hour of work the same attention he gave to the bark under his hand. The forest will not remember him. That no longer sounds cruel. It means he is free to stop bargaining with eternity and start honoring the next visible thing. He takes one final breath before moving on. The fog enters his lungs cold and leaves as a pale cloud that dissolves almost immediately. Brief, visible, gone. Still, it was real. The hiker walks forward, smaller than the trees, quieter than before, and more awake than when he entered. A disciplined life does not need to become vast. It needs to become fully attended. When he leaves the redwoods, the forest does not follow him. The ancient tree trunk remains in the fog, holding its age without explanation. But something of that morning travels with him. It may return later in a kitchen before work, when the phone is already pulling at his thumb. It may return in traffic, when the body wants noise just to avoid feeling alone. It may return when a message waits unanswered, and the easiest choice is to pretend there is no one on the other side. The practice is small. Touch what is real. Stand where you are. Answer the next human thing with full attention. Subscribe if this kind of quiet training belongs in your life. The present moment becomes a blade only when attention gives it an edge.